Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope that you're doing well. We really appreciate you watching our little short messages. You know that we just finished. Actually, it was a 10-part series on the Ten Commandments, and we're beginning a new series today. Now we're going to look first of all in the book of Exodus, chapter 3. But most of our short messages will be from the Gospel of John. And we're going to be looking at some of the statements that Jesus made, in particular, the things that he said when he said, I am. Now, you probably remember Jesus saying, I am the bread of life, or I am the light of the world, or I am the good shepherd. So, some of those things we're going to be kind of taking each one of them, and there's another place where Jesus said that before Abraham was, I am. So those are going to be some of the things in our series that we're going to be looking at over the next several weeks. But today we're going to start off in the book of Exodus. And I think that after I read some of these verses, you'll see why we're kind of setting the groundwork for our other messages that we'll be doing in the Gospel of John. So we have a title for the message today, and it's just simply called this, What is His Name? What is His name? And that actually comes from a question that Moses asked God. Now, God was speaking to Moses from the burning bush. You probably are familiar with that passage. And he was telling Moses that, Moses, you're going to be the one that's going to go back to Egypt and lead my people out of bondage. And this question that, you know how Moses was, he was a humble guy, a meek guy, and I think he was somewhat reluctant and didn't feel self-assured that he was up to the task. And so, you know, he asked some of these questions because he was kind of thinking in his mind, well, what if this happens and what if that happens? And so he wants to ask these questions of God. And so in Exodus chapter 3, verse 13, let's read that and see what it says. It says, Then Moses said to God, Indeed. I thought that was kind of funny that Moses would say God, indeed, especially in regard to Moses, God asking Moses to deliver his people. So Moses said to God, Indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, What is his name? And I thought that was kind of funny. So he's asking God this. He says, What shall I say to them? And I want you to notice that in this passage that Moses identifies God as the God of their fathers. Now, God, in this conversation from the burning bush, in an earlier passage, it would be in Exodus chapter 3, verse 6, God says this. He says, Moreover, he said to him, now listen to this, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. Now, I wanted to bring something out in this passage that may be of interest to you, and that is that God identified himself as the God of Moses' fathers, that is, the children of Israel's fathers, and he said so as though he was speaking in the present. He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And so when you think about that, you think that God is speaking in the present tense. That is, that presently he was their God. And you would think since these people had already died, that God would be speaking in the past tense. I was their God, but that's not what it says. And I find that very interesting because to God they were alive. Even though their bodies had died and they had grown old and passed on from this life, it didn't mean that they ceased to exist. And a lot of people, I think some people think that when you die here, you just cease to exist. And certainly that's not true. And these fathers of Moses, they were alive, and God spoke to them and spoke of them as he was their God in the present tense. Now, let's go ahead and look and see how God answers Moses' question. You remember the question that Moses asked God. He said, when I go to the children of Israel, what if they ask me, what is God's name? What am I going to say? And here's what God answers. And it's in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. And it says, and God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Now, I often have thought and wondered about this statement that God had made to Moses in answering that God said, my name is I am. And it kind of makes me scratch my head. I am that I am. And if you look at this word, if you look it up in the Hebrew, these English words, and look at the Hebrew rendering of it, the word actually means I exist. And another thing that's interesting about this word I am, it's a root word from where the word Yahweh or Jehovah comes. So we're looking at how God is telling Moses to answer this supposed question that the Israelites will ask him, what is his name? And God says, tell them that I am that I am. And so I'm thinking that perhaps what God is saying him here is that he is exerting his timeless existence. Now, what is it that I mean by that? I believe that he is saying that he exists. Tell them that I am, I exist, and I always have. And I just kind of thought that was interesting. You could say he said, I am. Now, if someone's name represents who they are, God may have simply be saying, I am, and I have always been so. Now, something else I think that is interesting is how Jesus also has used that expression. And so I'm talking about this passage. So in the future, I'll be leading into the Gospel of John, where Jesus also uses this statement. In fact, he said to the Pharisees, when they were talking about being children of Abraham, Jesus said that before Abraham was, I am. Now that's what Jesus said. Now there are other things that Jesus said, and it's possible, I suppose, that Jesus was offering a further explanation of what this meant, I am that I am. When he said in several of his statements, when he said, I am the bread of life. He also said, I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd, and on and on. There's several things that Jesus said. And so I'm wondering if Jesus was not making a further explanation of the statement, I am. In fact, he's saying, I am all of these things and even more. So let's think about that just a little bit. Is Jesus saying the same thing that God spoke to Moses from the bush? It sure sounds like it if you look at when he said that I am, because that's what God said to Moses. So God spoke, and also Jesus spoke. Now we certainly know, or we should believe, that Jesus is the divine Son of God, because we know that he said to Nicodemus in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. So Jesus identifies himself in this passage as the divine Son of God. And he says that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Now, I hope that this statement about God's answering to Moses' question, what is his name? And God says, I am that I am. I hope that hadn't been confusing to you. It is somewhat confusing, and it makes me wonder sometimes some of the passages that I read, what exactly does this mean? So we're going to be looking in the future in more detail, especially in the Gospel of John, to the things that Jesus said. And I can just say I'm sure that Jesus was aware of this passage over in Exodus when God was speaking to Moses from the burning bush. You know, when Moses said, taking care of his father-in-law's flock on the backside of the desert, and he saw this miraculous thing. It was a bush that was on fire and that it was not consumed. And he said, I have got to go see this. So he came close to the bush, and the voice of the angel of God spoke and said, Moses. And then Moses said, here I am. And he said, you need to pull off your shoes because the place that you are on right now is holy ground. And truly it is holy ground. Anytime that we are talking about God and in God's presence, it makes it holy. So I want to say just thank you for tuning in today, and hope that you have a really good week, and want to encourage you to continue to listen to some of the further short messages that we're going to have about Jesus talking about this subject.